Simon Rosenberg, Hopium Chronicles. Welcome, everybody. Here with our regular gathering of our proud, plucky, and patriotic paid subscribers. Thank you all for being here tonight, and for those of you who are watching the recording afterwards. Um, I have three things I want to get to tonight, just to observations about things, and then we'll get to questions. Um, Number one, I'm calling Plunder and Sabotage. Number two, legitimacy and crimes. And then three, I want to do a report in from my trip to Little Rock and the meeting of the state Democratic parties over the last couple of days. So, number one, plunder and sabotage. I think that we have spoken here and talked here about how one way to interpret what Trump was doing was that he was a saboteur, that he was engaging in sabotage of the American project. And this has been a constant theme that we've been on for many months. And I think that to me, there was sort of a significant escalation in the sabotage aspect of his regime in the last couple of weeks, which is this escalating attack on science and knowledge and academia, the sort of wild foray of Kennedy and HHS into anti-vax stuff, which is a form of national sabotage, and also the movement of the reconciliation bill, which would, if it is to be passed, would dramatically weaken the fiscal integrity of the United States and would be another form of sabotage. And I think that when I when you look at what he's doing right now, sort of his strategy, it's first plunder, right? He's just plundering the treasury. He's got a big bag of money, a big bag that he's asking everybody to pour money into. He's like this rapacious glutton who's just, in this disgusting, illegal, unconstitutional, offensive, immoral way. He's just piling as much money as he possibly can into his family and to his own, and the blinding greed that is driving so much of what's happening here. It's just overwhelming. But the second piece is that there are four elements to the economic part of the sabotage that I just want to review because this is going to be central to the debate when the Senate comes back next week for their consideration of the reconciliation bill. The first form was the tariffs, right? The tariffs rose prices. It was a massive tax increase on working people. It was part of his broader economic strategy to move the the responsibility for taxation and revenue from wealthy people to working people. It is alienating our allies, angering the world, making American leadership look feckless and self-interested and greedy, and irrational and crazy, right? Um, and then and it's slowing the economy down, right? I mean, the tariffs will permanently slow the American economy, despite the administration's claims they're going to get, I mean, what's so interesting in the last few days in their desperation, they're starting to make the same arguments that they made in 2017 and 2018, that the tax cuts would pay for themselves, that there'd be 3% GDP growth, right? None of this stuff happened, right? The deficit went up every year under Trump in the first term. We didn't. Joe Biden hit 3% GDP growth, not Donald Trump, and so they're now starting to sort of dig up these same arguments they made, discredited, ridiculous arguments they made in 2017, 2018. But the tariffs are dangerous and they are weakening the entire global economic system, which has made us the most prosperous nation in the history of the world. The second part of sabotage is the reconciliation bill, which would further move the responsibility for the burden of taxation from wealthy people to working people. It will dramatically undermine our healthcare system in America, cut Medicaid, Medicare, and the ACA. We're learning more about, we'll see what happens in the Senate. The Senate may come up with a completely different bill, but just working off of the House example, We know that food prices and healthcare costs will go up for, poor and working people. And it will also, though, importantly, and this is where the administration is getting very sensitive, is that it will dramatically increase the deficit and to a point that it's risking the fiscal integrity of the United States. This is the reason the bond market is freaking out. This is the reason that the America's safe haven status is under threat. And that part of the theory that Trump has, and it's just a theory because it's not necessarily true, was that some of that deficit would be offset by the revenue that were coming in from the tariffs. And he always dramatically overestimated how much revenue would come in, right? This was no, almost nothing they say about the economy is true. But now that the tariffs are in doubt, and part of what happened in the last 24 hours is that if you're part of one of those countries that are negotiating with the United States, Trump looks like an unbelievable fucking buffoon that he went out and did this radical global economic policy, put 10% tax on working people in the United States, drove costs up here, slowed the economy down. And he did it without the legal authority to do so. This is something we've been talking about here from the very beginning, that there is no way that of all the powers that the founders would have given to the executive, our president, they never would have given unilateral tariff authority because of the experience, because these sort of irrational tariffs by Mad King George, taxation without representation, were a central driver of the revolution. And so there would be no way coming out of that experience that they would have ever created a system that of all the things the president would have the power to do, the one thing that he was almost guaranteed that he would not have the power to do was to levy unilateral tariffs, taxation without representation, right? And so this idea that he's asserting this power that he doesn't have is not only, incredible and wild and a betrayal of the country, but it's also an even deeper portrayal of our story and how America was founded and under the circumstances that it was founded. I mean, it's like taking out the one thing that you just can't do as an American president, which is to levy these unilateral tariffs, because of the centrality of it to our founding story and the whole reason that we separated from a mad king like Donald Trump, 250, almost 250 years ago. The third form of sabotage um, is coming with immigration, and where now Donald Trump is clearly trying to remove millions and millions of workers, people who are currently working in the United States, legal and illegal, right? Many millions of legal immigrants, people who had legal status a few months ago, that are many of whom are going through the process of losing that status. And taking in a time of still low unemployment because of the strong economy he inherited, removing millions of workers from the economy all at the same time, which is going to radically disrupt business. It's going to create incredible worker shortages in rural parts of the country. It's going to drive up our food costs and transportation costs and healthcare costs and all the things where immigrants work in the United States. And it's going to be like his other policies. It's inflationary. It drives up inflation. It raises prices and costs. It creates enormous economic disruption to hardworking American entrepreneurs and businesses, and also many mom and pop businesses, right? And then third, it's obviously inhumane and immoral what they're doing in the way that they're treating immigrants and migrants into the United States. Today, the administration announced that they are opening up an office of remigration, is called, or reimmigration. I don't, it's a term I never was unfamiliar with until today. And it's a term that is part of the neo-Nazi right in Europe about removing forcibly people that you don't want to be in the country. So they're now using openly neo-Nazi language, European neo-Nazi far-right language regarding the immigrants in Europe. They're now opening up a formal office, it will be in the government of the United States, and to continue this incredible bureaucratic effort to remove millions and millions and millions of people, while of course allowing in, uh, beleaguered whites from South Africa. And then the fourth is this attack on academia. The other sabotage is the attack on academia knowledge and research in the U.S. and science. which we're going to be spending a lot of time on here. I mean, because, I've been writing about it a lot the last few weeks. We're going to try to start doing events around it. I'm still working on that. And I think that this is the part of all the things that he's doing that is sort of the most like sabotage and the least like that there is an kind of some kind of, veneer of legitimacy around what he's doing, right? This is just seems like just out of pure fanaticism that they're just burning shit down, right? They're attacking the research institutions in the United States. They're dismantling the public health system in the United States. I mean, all of this together, these four things together, right? The tariffs, the reconciliation bill, the mass deportation of both legal and illegal immigrants, and also the war on science together is going to make America poorer, to create less opportunity for working people in America. It's going to make us far less healthy. It's going to make our companies far less competitive in the world. It is literally a strategy to make China and Russia great again and not the United States. And it's just incredible to me how overwhelming it is that there is no other interpretation of this, right? There are these fig leaf stories that are told about, economic growth, and we cut here, and there's, these many false stories that they've been spreading for decades. But this stuff that when you put it all together, Donald Trump is the most dangerous person in the history of the country. And as many people have written, this feels far more like sabotage by a foreign country of the United States than the legitimate acts of an American president. And that's the second thing I want to get to, which is this idea of legitimacy. And I'm not a political scientist. I'm not Ruth Ben Gayed and Timothy Snyder. I'm not steeped in all in this language. But the legitimacy, the argument for why Trump can do all these things that are immoral, illegal, unconstitutional, and again and again and again, is that he won the election. Not that they're legal, not that the Constitution allows it, not that he has the authority to do it by our system that's over 200 years old, but that he won. And so therefore he can do whatever he wants. And that the legitimacy he's deriving from for these actions is coming from his victory in the election. And there are two things about that that I think we have to start getting into, right? Because in essence, it's like a get out of jail free card. Like, I won the election, I can do all this stuff. And it was in my post today, one of the judges in the court in the tariff case said that's a nice story, but it's not legal, right? Like, you may want to do all those things, but it's not permissible under law in the United States for you to do these things, as if that doesn't matter to them, right? And I think that because they won the election, not they do things because they won, not because they're legal or permissible. And we have to start, I think, diving into this a little bit more. I think that Trump is asserting a legitimacy for his actions that doesn't exist. And we have to start calling him and these actions illegitimate. In addition to unconstitutional, illegal, we have to question the legitimacy of how he's interpreting the presidency itself. And that he's, in essence, creating a position, as I've said before, that doesn't exist under our system, right? Which is the Mad King position that he's occupying. It's an illegitimate exercise of power. And we have to start removing the legitimacy from his and challenging the legitimacy, not just the legality and the constitutionality, but the legitimacy. And they're not the same. And this is really important, I think. And it's something that I'm going to start trying to engage others to sort of create a conversation around this. But connected to that, right, is that there is no conversation happening in the US about the way this stuff gets reported is that laws were broken, or they went too far, or they claimed powers they did not have. Not that Donald Trump broke the law, or that Elon Musk broke the law, or the Doge Bros broke the law, right? And we have to start asserting a level, a language around criminality and legitimacy into the discourse that is just simply not there in our current discourse. I mean, it is like every time that these rulings are made against them, it doesn't mean laws were broken. It means that people broke laws, a human, right? It's all in the passive voice. And we have to put it into the active voice, right? That there is a, you know, it's not that laws were broken, is that Donald Trump broke laws. And then what the fuck do we do about that, right? Because this happened already, right? He was already impeached twice. He already attacked the Capitol. He already stole America's secrets and gave them away to other people. And there were no consequences. And so, is the story of the next 10 to 20 years going to be, them basically getting mass pardons for all their crimes and us in the spirit of bringing the country together, sort of looking the other way at this, assuming that we reestablish the integrity of the constitutional order of the United States, this issue of what happens to them and trumps all of his ill-gotten wealth and all the things that are happening, we have to start laying the predicate now that not that laws were broken, but that he is breaking laws, and that justice may not have prevailed, in 2019 and 2020 and in 2020 and 2021 and in this Merrick Garland era and McConnell covering for him in the two, during the two impeachments. But we have to start asserting criminality here and accountability. Because if we don't, right, then we are obeying in advance. If we allow them to move kind of the conversation to a place where there are no consequences for their illegality and their actions, then we are participating in the erosion of American democracy, right? This is, somebody put on our chat today, well, Simon, why does it matter the tariff a decision if the courts can't enforce? Well, because if we don't assert the constitutional order and the primacy of the constitutional order, if we give up on that, then we become just as bad as they are, right? This is a whole sort of thought exercise about how we have to continue to act and every day as if the constitutional order still exists. Because once we stop doing that, then we're allowing them to move, we then join them in the erosion of the constitutional order itself, right? The third thing I want to say is that, one of the things I'm most proud of that we've done at Hopium in the last couple of years is that we've made major investments in state parties. State parties are sort of like the bastard children in our family, right? They are there, everyone knows they're there, and everyone sort of has all these excuses about why we don't fund state parties and make them central to everything we do. Democratic state parties and the DNC can do things that no other parts of our family can do, right? They by law, and they are our most important set of institutions for electing Democrats, right? And even though our campaigns now are raising incredible amounts of money, and through the big presidential campaign, the DNC has a lot of money pouring through it. The state parties are starved. They're starved. They have not, in this time of abundance where we've been raising billions and billions of dollars. The state parties have not had champions to redirect money into the state parties. And we've raised $2 million in the last, I just calculated tonight, in the last year and a half for the DNC and for the Nebraska Party, for the North Carolina Party, and the Wisconsin Democratic Party. About half of that going into North Carolina. And look at the results that we had, right? In North Carolina, we not only, even though Kamala lost by almost 3 points, right? We won 5 out of the 10 statewide elections in North Carolina. It was our most successful battleground state in the country below the presidential level. We broke the supermajority they had in the legislature. We won Allison Riggs twice, right? We won that race twice. Wisconsin, another state that we've poured, over $300,000 into the state party just in the last 6 months, 7 months. I mean, we did it starting in September. We had huge state legislative gains in Wisconsin, the best and most significant state legislative gains that we made in any of the battleground states last election. We helped fund that. We also just won a Supreme Court race where we put a lot of money into that. Nebraska, right? We won the blue dot. It was the only of the targeted, electoral college votes that in the battleground that we won, right? We were the largest funder, like we were the largest funder in Nebraska and North Carolina. We were the largest fundraiser for the Nebraska Party in the whole country. And not only did we win the Blue Dot, we just won Omaha. And Jane Klebb, the Nebraska chair, rode the success to become now the president of the association, the state Democratic committees, they're called, the state parties. And she's now the president, taking over for Ken Martin, who used that position to become national chair. We've raised $2 million into this. And I think that one of the things that I just became aware of is that as we look to do our next thing, right, and to build this next and better Democratic Party and center left and this whole ecosystem in our family, we have to make funding of the state parties central to everything we do. And it's one of the reasons that I'm encouraging all of you to volunteer for your state and local parties to help invigorate them, right? I've been very pleased that this community came up with one of the big ideas that is galvanizing the state parties right now, which is the People's Town Hall project, which came out of Hopium, right? As Jane Clubb told us a few weeks ago when she was here. And so, yesterday I gave a presentation along with Tom Bonnier to all the state party chairs and the executive directors and the leaders of the 50 state parties and the 7 territories that were there and some national Democrats. And I'll be bringing some of those insights, into our work. This was a private presentation for people who are in the game, running elections. I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to release the presentation itself, but I'm going to take elements of it and I'm going to try to have Tom come on to do his presentation. We're going to do something together in the next few weeks where we take what we did and sort of make it something that's a little bit more accessible, right, to not, people that aren't running state parties, right? This was a very specific set of recommendations I made. But to all of you, I want to make state parties cool again, right? This is something that's been important to me. I was received, you should know that Hopium was Jane Klebb introduced me in front of everybody and said, everyone needs to be subscribing to Hopium. They've been a great champion for all of us. They've been fighting and warriors, raising money, doing remarkable work. She said, I read the newsletter every day. I always learn from Simon, right? And we were given a great reception, everybody. I mean, the work that we've done with all these people on the front lines of all these battles, right, all across the country. I got questions in the Q&A from people from South Dakota, and I spent time talking to the state party chairs of Missouri and Alaska. And one of the two big points that I made were I think that we are stronger than we look or feel right now as a party, that we are stronger than we look and feel. I wrote about this a little bit today. And also that we need to win in more red places. I mean, we have to not only build a new coalition, but we have a new map that we have set of maps and demographic realities that we have to deal with. If we want to control the Senate over time, right, we have to win in more red places. If we want to be competitive at the presidential level because of population shifts, moving from bluer areas to what are now redder areas, we are going to have to put Texas and Florida in play by the 2032 presidential election. We have no choice. This isn't an option. We're going to have to spend enormous amounts of money rebuilding the Democratic parties and in both of those states. We have no choice. It's not something that we can debate. There's a just pure math and a map that we have to adhere to. And I think that as I talked about the coalition that we need to build, and I'll wrap up here, I said my basic point about the coalition is that we just need more of everything, right? We need more young men. We need more Hispanics. We need more African Americans. We need more rural, right? We need more red places. We need more everything. We need more working people. When you're in a coalition, you can't allow one part of the coalition to dictate terms to the rest, right? We're in a family together. And I think we have to think in coalition terms. And I think one of the things that I'm sometimes alarmed about a little bit in the current conversation is how much that there are parts of our coalition who are asserting primacy over other parts. And we need just more of everything, right? We need more of everything. And, the good news is, as I presented and I've been writing here, is that the coalition that Trump won with has already kind of that wandered to him at the end in 2024 has started wandering away from him. It doesn't mean they've come to us, but his numbers with independents, Hispanics, and young people who were the groups that kind of surged to him at the end that created a lot of problems for us, those are the ones that have really soured on him. And so his coalition has already unraveled. Now our job is to go bring them back in and also to go get more because we need to win if we're going to win the Senate this time, we have to go win in some hard places that are going to be difficult for us. And we have to build a politics and an understanding that winning in red places and purple places and red places, right, now has to become central to who we are and what we do, right? We have to grow, we have to expand, we have to be bigger because we're not big enough. We don't control the House, the Senate, and the presidency, right? We need more. And this issue of, even though we've been beating them in the popular vote far more than they have, because of the population distribution and because of our a political system that appropriates power in ways that disproportionately benefit rural places in the United States. And this is something I've written about extensively over decades, but I'm going to start bringing it back into all of our understanding here, is that we have to, we have to win in California, New York, Illinois, and all these places and win the popular vote. But we're going to have to figure out, in addition to Florida and Texas, other red states that we can make competitive, and we're just never going to win the Senate back, right? And this is a real. Chris Murphy's been talking about this. This cycle, right? We just had Haley Stevens on, who's a leading candidate, who's the just in a new poll, is doing better than any other Democratic candidate in the Michigan Senate race. John Ossoff is doing very well out of the box in Georgia for keeping that seat. In North Carolina, again, we'll be on the front lines. We have a potential Senate pickup, but it's very hard to see how we get to 51 in this cycle, right? Maine could be competitive depending on what happens with Susan Collins. If we win North Carolina, Maine, that gets us to 49. But all of you should just go look at the Senate map this election and the next election, and you try to chart a course for us to get to 51, 52, 53. It's going to require us to win in places that we haven't been winning. And so we are going to have to figure out an expansion strategy. This is something we talked a lot about 2 years ago at Hopium, that is about where we're going over the next 10 years. And the good news is that Ken Martin understands all this. Ken Martin is building a party. He's building a 10-year plan. I have been in collaboration with the team that's been working on this. They've seen my decks. I've interviewed with them extensively. But I leave that event with a couple just takeaways. One is a lot of new chairs, a lot of energy in the room. People are hungry. People know that Trump is stumbling, and that people sense opportunity, right? It doesn't mean we will, but there's a chance that we could have a very good election this election, and win back the House, potentially get very close or flip the Senate, and build. We could have a majority of governorships in the United States. But we're going to have to do a lot of work to grow our coalition, win back stuff that we lost, go into new places, rural areas that we haven't been as competitive, right? We've got to have an expansion strategy demographically and geographically. And this is going to be this is going to become more central to the Hopium project. I invested a lot of money in places like Wisconsin and North Carolina. North Carolina went from being not a battleground state at the beginning of the presidential process to being arguably our most successful battleground state in 2024. And we raised $1.1 million. We were the big mover in North Carolina. This was a huge success. We need to be looking at other places where we can do similar things, right? This cycle. Nebraska was another big success for us, right? We were the largest fundraiser for Ruben Gallego in a race where the battleground state where we lost by the most. We won that Senate race. We were the biggest fundraiser for that. So we had huge wins together, everybody. And now I want to really look to how we keep that kind of strategy and apply it to this cycle. I'm very excited about David Jolly in Florida, that I think he has the capacity to sort of put Florida back in play this cycle. I'm going to be doing an event for anyone in South Florida. I haven't formally announced this yet, but I'm going to be doing an event with David Jolly a week from Monday, June 9th, in Palm Beach County somewhere, and I'm still getting all the details for it. So I'll be in Florida with David next Monday, a week from Monday, and for any of you in South Florida. And I'm looking heavily at South Florida. And we're already going to be hard into North Carolina. And then, we've got to pick up a few more expansion, targets geographically this cycle. Maybe Maine, right? Maybe it's a place that we haven't gone, depending on what happens with Susan Collins. There's a in Alaska, the House flipped from Republican to this sort of coalition of independents and moderate Republicans and Democrats. And so we just had some significant gains in Alaska, and Lisa Murkowski has distanced herself significantly from the Trump administration. I don't know what's going to happen, but I came away from this event getting back into sort of Simon strategy mode instead of just fighting Trump every day, right? Which is really where I'm at my best in many ways and where I can make the biggest contribution in the family. But also, I came away with a sense that there were a lot of new young chairs who had energy and passion. It wasn't just Anderson Clayton. I think Anderson has been an inspiration for a lot of people that you can be successful in a chair, as a chair in a major battleground state in your 20s, right? Anderson's all of now 27 years old, right? And been successful. But I met with the chair of Georgia and the chair of Texas. And these were, folks that want to win and they're young and they've got energy and they're used to the new playing field. And so it was exciting. I mean, I came away energized and I'll be bringing in the insights from my couple days there over the next few weeks. But it's also gotten me already thinking about how we approach this cycle, what we do with our time and our money. We were very successful at putting new stuff into play and investing and expanding the map and expanding demographically. Yeah, this time we need to do it again this time for new circumstances. So that's the report. I went on a little bit long. And let me get to questions, right? We now can all read these questions. And Lincoln, if you can do what now that you can read it, if you can summarize, guys, I've been saying, hey, Lincoln, can you summarize the questions? And he couldn't read them. I didn't understand that until last week. We sort of figured this out. Um, Lisa asked, how is focusing on the state parties different than Dean's 50 state strategy? So the 50 state strategy was actually because I ran for chair in that cycle against Dean and I lost by one vote in the final weekend for chairman of the party 20 years ago. That was a strategy of the state chairs that we all signed up for. And what Ken Martin is doing already is they're making much more significant investments in the state parties than Dean did 20 years ago. The baseline of money that is going to be given for the national party to all 50 states is significantly more than what moved out. And so Ken Martin has the most ambitious, aggressive program of funding and growing and improving and modernizing state parties that has ever been in place in the modern history of the Democratic Party. And I've had Jane on to talk about this now twice. Anderson's talked about it. I'm going to have Ken come on. But if you go to the DNC site, the program they have is called Organize Everywhere, Win Anywhere. And if you haven't read that, I encourage you to read it. It's their plan for what they're going to do in the states. And, they are giving more money every month to red states than they are to blue states, right? As a sign of us needing to go win, to learn how to win in red areas, and that we're going to be competing everywhere. So for those of you who are fans of the 50 state strategy, you're going to love Ken Martin and Jane Klebb, because what they're doing is on a much greater scale than anything that Dean did and that what we did during that time. But it's still insufficient. I mean, I didn't know this. Jane told us this in one of our interviews. Do you know that last cycle, 40 of the 50 state Democratic Party chairmen were volunteers and were not paid, meaning they had other jobs. And so the people running our state parties and leading us into elections all across the United States are volunteers. I didn't know that. I didn't know it was that high. I didn't know it was that big a number. It's shocking. It was shocking to me when I heard that. How can we possibly believe that we can win and we have a field general, state party chair who's not a full-time person? And so one of the things that's happening in these investments that are being made by the DNC is going to make it possible for more and more state chairs to go full-time. And also it's going to do this other thing that Tom, Bonnier talked about, which is, in the presentation he gave was new data that we'll be bringing in here, is is that we now know definitively that we got beat badly in voter registration over the last 4 years, and it contributed significantly to our disappointing election at the presidential level. And that part of the money that's going into these state parties is for us to revive partisan voter registration. And for those of you who like to do voter registration, I did this Field Team 6 event last week. every state and local party now in the country is going to be doing some form of partisan voter registration. There's going to be a much greater commitment to this. It's going to become very central to what we do now from now on. And if you like to do voter reg, right, contact your state and local parties and ask how you can volunteer and be part of that effort. Help accelerate it, help grow it, help build it, right? Because we moved away from partisan voter registration 20 years ago, in part because in a time when Republicans had more money than we did, we started moving some of our core activities of the party to 501c3s and C4s in order just to pragmatically find other revenue sources for some of this activity, right? And so what it means, and Jane talked about this at length in our last interview, is that means for young people today, the first touch that they have with our broad family is not with Democrats. It's with nonpartisan organizations. And what's happened is that we've seen this huge increase of young people registering as declined to state or independent. Tom Bonnier talked about this over the weekend, yesterday, that, we thought that was okay because they were still voting with us. But as Jane says, is that, you want to build a relationship with the Democratic Party, at the very beginning. And we are missing a step in building out our coalition over time, which is that we're allowing large numbers of people who are ideologically affiliated with us to register as something other than a Democrat. And so we have to change that. And I think there's a real commitment to this. And this is going to become also an important part of what we do here, that, our self-reports, our activities, we're going to be talking about all the voter reg, work that we do, together, because it's going to become more and more important. Um, so a few people have asked about, did I meet particular chairs? I did meet Kendall Scudder in Texas. He is an impressive guy, inherited a large debt. There isn't a long history of really funding. The Democratic Party, I'm just going to say this, in Texas really atrophied over a long period of time. We've got a lot of work to do there. He's a frontline guy. He seemed very impressive. I did meet briefly with the Arizona chair. I didn't really, we're agreed to do a call. And so one of the things that Tom and I agreed to do is that we offered to do an hour meeting or call as follow up with any state party that wants to talk to us for an hour. And so, my assumption is that there will be follow-on meetings with a bunch of these parties. And certainly when they heard that we raised North Carolina over $1 million, everyone got very excited to meet me afterwards. And and Anderson, I could see Anderson's face when I said it, and she said everyone started scowling at her in the in the meeting. It was very funny. Um, okay, let me go into other questions, and I saw a link in some of your notes here. Yeah, look, I mean, there's a question about winning back Republicans. We have to, it's not the first step is winning back or reconnecting with we got 51. I mean, in that chart that is a chart, the chart that I shared with you today, that was part of my presentation. There's this sort of story in the party that our coalition is in some kind of long time decline and that we're atrophying and that we're losing ground. And I just want to say that that's not true. And if you look at the graph that I showed today on Hopium, in the 11 elections from 1948 to 1988, which is the Cold War era, Republicans won more votes 7 out of 11 of those elections. In the 9 elections since then, from 92 on, we've won more votes in 7 out of 9 elections. We only broke 50% of the vote twice, from 48 to 88, in 64 and 76, and those were under extraordinary circumstances. And even after Watergate, we only got 50.1% of the vote, right? Then in the last 5 elections that we've had, we've broken 50% of the vote 3 times. So in the period from 2008 to 2020, we averaged 51% of the vote over those 4 elections. The last time we did that was during FDR's 4 elections. We have been consistently getting to 50 and into the high 40s, much more so than the Republicans have. The Republicans have actually struggled much more with building a majority coalition than we have. And so this idea that we're in some kind of slow erosion and burn, I reject that, right? We had a, even in this election, which where we underperformed expectations, we still won down ballot in many of these same states. We've been winning elections this year. We've been overperforming in elections. We had a really good election in 2018, 2020, and 2022, right? Like this idea that this is why the line I use, we're stronger than we look, right? Like we should not be so down on ourselves. The path for us to regain the House is very clear. The ability for us to have a majority of governorships this cycle is very clear. Can we flip the Senate? I don't know. And so, this idea that the Democratic Party is kind of like in some kind of structural huge decline. I mean, this is just not true, right? Based on data, not based on vibes, right? And, we can be both aware that we're stronger than we look, but also clearly not where we need to be, right? And both of those things can be true at the same time. And I think that the first step is that this part of our coalition that wandered from us, right? Young people, Hispanics, independents, they've now wandered from Trump, and we got to go get them as a first step. And then we got to go figure out how to win in more red places, right? I mean, it's both of these things. These are things that I think this idea that we have to learn how to win in more red places and that we have to invest in places like Florida and Texas, this is not really part of the thinking of the family. I mean, there's been rural projects, but I think it's more about red places than just rural, right? I don't think it's only rural. Um, and what was great is I spent time with people from Missouri and, Alaska, talking this out and talking about how they're opposing Trump and what they're seeing. And I do think there are going to be real opportunities in more rural-based economies to argue that Trump has really betrayed the rural, sort of rural America through the tariffs, through the immigration plans, through this sort of plunder, and through the movement of the putting the tax burden away from wealthy people onto everyday people, right? I think there's going to be an opening for us in more rural-based economies. It doesn't mean rural parts of those states, but states that have more of an identity as a more rural place, right? A red place that we're going to have an opening that we're going to have to sort of learn how to seize. And so part of what I also talked about is that I think we have to revamp our research. And I'm not going to spend time getting into this tonight because it's a little bit nerdy in how polling and research is done. But I think that we're not listening enough. We're not listening properly. We have to change how we sort of approach research, I think, to sort of create a wider aperture and to be open to more things. I mean, when you think about politics, it's not only through issues, it's through a lot of other stuff. And I talked about something we talk about here a lot, strength and weakness, winning and losing, this perception of us being a strong party. I think this Democrats beating up on ourselves is sabotage, right? Because, why does anyone want to join the Democratic Party if we think we suck? And if we don't think that we're good and strong and virtuous and have done a good job, then we should expect to lose, right? And this is part of, I think, what I argued at the event yesterday is that I think Harris's decision after she had won the debate and she had, crushed Trump in the debate and was winning in the polls, for her to then say that I'm the underdog, she was making herself weak and making him strong. She was becoming not the winner, but somebody who was potentially going to lose. And I don't know that we're going to learn about the decision that they made to sort of position her as the underdog. And I think that, as you know, if you followed Hopium at the time, I was very unhappy about that. I thought it was a misread of this part of the way that people see politics, which is they just want to go with the winner. They want to be with successful people. For people that don't have strong political beliefs, right? Like Trump's rich and he's winning, and so like I'll go with him. And now that Trump is like screwing them over and betraying them economically, people have fled him very quickly because the relationship with him was transactional and temporal and ephemeral. It wasn't strong. It wasn't because he was strong. It was because there was this late breaking perception that he was winning the election due to, in part, all these right-wing pollsters that are flooding the polling averages, right? And the election broke away from us at the end. And I think that part of the reason that happened was that Donald Trump presented himself as strong, the winner, successful, and Kamala was telling people she was the underdog. And you want to go with the winner, like you want to be on the winning team. This is kind of a basic thing. And I think that, that part of the game isn't the kind of stuff that we poll. And in the exit polls that I showed in the presentation, and I'll be sharing some of these slides each day on the attribute of strong leader in the exit polls in 2024, they had a series of attributes, person like me, values people like me that are very, the one that was the highest was strong leader. And Trump beat Kamala 2-1 as a strong leader. You can't win elections if you're losing by, 2-1 as a strong leader. You can't be president and be seen as not a strong leader. And I think that the all those emails that you guys got telling us we were losing the election and which were false, by the way, in many cases, and lies by the fundraising people to get more money out of all of you, those created a perception in our family that we were losing when we weren't. And I think this was a huge kind of mind fuck to ourselves in this election that is something that operates outside of our research, right? We don't research strong leader, weak leader, winning and losing, the things that Trump, taps into cultural issues, right? We test most of our polling is about issues, and we have to expand the aperture and widen the aperture to what we're listening to, so that we don't get caught in this kind of narrow, you you what you research is what you find. And if you have sort of a predilection towards certain things, you may miss other things. We have to, I think, learn how to listen differently and than we've been doing. And I laid this out to a bunch of people who are very experienced in polling and winning elections, and I got an interesting response from folks. I mean, this is something I'll be talking about more in the coming weeks. Let me go back to the questions. We're getting great questions tonight. Yeah, I mean, David's raising. I just want to go back to this. Kamala told us that she was the underdog. That was her decision. She could have said, I kicked his ass. I'm winning the election, right? I'm strong, he's weak, right? And I'm winning and he's losing. They chose not to do that. They chose not to do that in the emails that you got. She said, I'm not strong and I'm winning. I'm the underdog. He's strong. I'm weak. This was a decision they made. This was not about her being a woman or being a woman of color. This was a strategic decision where I think we gave away power to them in a way that, that was, I think, it may have played a significant role in her losing. And you want the evidence of that? 10 days before election day, Jen O'Malley Dillon changed the tune from I'm an underdog to we're going to win this election. Everything looks really good. We feel really good about where we are. And there was a complete shift in the way they were talking about the election. She was no longer the underdog. She was winning. And it meant that they were seeing something in the data and their stuff that made them change their strategy. And so I think we have to, and again, I mean, I don't know that we're ever going to know the answer to this, but I can tell you that, people want to go with strength and strong leaders, and we don't even research that. It's not in our research. We don't test strong leader, weak leader in our research. The Republicans do. It's central to their whole kind of ecosystem of understanding how to, gauge the strength and weakness of politicians. Um, Let me just look at other questions here. Yeah, I mean, there's a question about am I going to, I have offered to all the 50 state chairs to do a call with them. And I assume a bunch of states will take us up on that. I mean, there's a limit in my time. I'm doing it free. I'm just doing it because I care, and it's a way of me contributing to them. And I had a great conversation with Russ Carnahan from Missouri. I know his family, and he's a really good chair. And we could have a competitive House race in Missouri this cycle. It could be really exciting. And so again, this is like us expanding the map and going bigger. I think we're going to be able to do that. Let me, yeah, what I didn't mention today, also just because it's come up a few times, is that I think this story of Musk kind of running out of town and doing interviews that he feels defeated and beat, I don't believe anything he says, right? But there is a pretty clear, a bunch of the Doge leadership were had, resigned or are leaving now today. It was announced. I think this is a fascinating thing that's happened. Elon in these interviews he's doing with the New York Times, the Washington Post, and others is presenting himself as humbled. And again, he will say and do anything, and so we have to take all this with a grain of salt. But he's he's presenting himself as a humbled man, right? And that Washington kind of beat him. And it's sort of fascinating to me what's happening here. I'm processing it. I'm not creating a judgment yet about what happened, what really happened here. But I do think a couple things happened. I think number one is that Trump didn't want to share the limelight and that it's his administration and Elon was taking up too much space. Two is that I think Elon probably was convinced by lawyers that he was has legal exposure to all the illegal, the hundreds of crimes that he personally committed while he was here, and then he needed to sort of start running away from all this. Third is that I think the cabinet secretaries and the Senate and the House Republicans were angry at what Elon was doing and that he was usurping their authorities and that they didn't like it. And so there was immense bureaucratic pushback. And then fourth, his companies were severely damaged by the Tesla takedowns and the sort of the attack on, the pushback on him, and he had to go save his empire. And so, I think this is sort of a big, fascinating story. And I used the term on Blue Sky the other day about Elon as Icarus, right? And that he flew too close to the sun and, is falling. I don't think that Elon has given up on politics. I think he's going to give the Republicans hundreds of millions of dollars. I think that's all bullshit. And he's doing that to help assuage the fears of some of his big investors. But, this is a victory for us. I mean, what's happened here is that Elon, there is a perception that he did not succeed here. And, for Silicon Valley and for all the other folks that are following him, that admire him, this is kind of a reckoning, right? I mean, it's a fascinating thing that happened, and I'm still processing it, and I'm a little surprised how Elon's playing this, now. And it's not blustery, there's humility, and it's something we just have to, in my view, this is another loss for Trump, that this was a failure. I mean, the whole Doge thing. I know there are people who think that they've got these secret plans and everything else, but politically, Elon's unfavorabilities were immense, much higher than Trump's. And he's now hated in the country. And this is affecting his business, it's affecting his ability to sell stuff. And he's hated in Europe. I mean, he's hated in other parts of the world. And, all of a sudden he's gone from being the great, genius to being, the world's biggest asshole. And I don't think he likes it. And one of the things that I talk about in politics is that, if you're a politician and you win a race 51-49, you win and it's a success. But that means that 49% of the people voted against you. And for many business people, right, they're not used to having opposition. They're not used to having people hate them. And for those of us who do this for a living, that's like the entry price in politics that, you're super successful. If half the people in your state or district hate you, then you're successful. You want to keep that at 49%, right? And so he has never, it's often the case for people who've not been in politics, who have this fawning business press and, all the stuff that Elon does, that they're not used to this kind of anger and antipathy that is common in our business, that Elon himself expressed towards us, right? And towards our candidates. Um, but and not everybody is capable of staying in the game when you have that level of antipathy towards you. And it's the line I use that in politics, it's like basketball, right? The other team's going to score. You just have to score more. And if you think that you're going to live in a world where you're the only one scoring, this is not the right business for you, right? And so it's been remarkable to me what's happened with Elon, and we should continue to talk about it and understand it. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Lauren asks about the classic question, and I'll end with this about mis and disinformation. Look, it's central to hopium that we have to get louder. And I have written all these things. I founded Hopium on Substack so that I could use this new media myself to reach more people. I promoted Midas Touch and Courier Newsroom and Deep State Radio and Lincoln Square. I've been a huge promoter of this new, I mean, I was a pioneer on Substack, which has now become, very large actors now are on Substack. I mean, this site, Hopium, was without question a democratic pioneering site in this new media space ourselves, right? We're inventing new media ourselves every day that we're involved in Hopium, right? And yeah, but it's not just young people, and we have to be very careful about this, right? That, we we have to be louder and with everybody, because they not only have Trump in the White House and this right-wing ecosystem and the media machine, and they have is that it's not just that Joe Rogan and TikTok, right? It's the whole thing. It's everybody. And yes, we have to focus on lower political information voters, right? But what was incredible about what's happened with lower political information voters is they're the ones who bailed on Trump more than anyone else, right? The Hispanics, young men, independents who aren't low information voters, they're low political information voters. They don't consume a lot of news. Those folks have moved against him more than any other part of the electorate right now. And so they are being reached, not by us, right? But part of what the DNC is doing, there's going to be, the DNC itself is getting louder. They're building modern communications. They're going to be running 24/7. But I'll give you an example, right? This week, the House and Senate Democrats went on recess, and Trump is having events every day. And we're just not going to be able to go, they're not going to be able to go on recess anymore, right? They're going to have somebody each day doing a press event here. They can fly in a senator, or they do it one day and a different senator the next day. But this kind of, we are behind. And if you're a Hopium reader, right, you're aware that this conversation about how we get louder and how we become information warriors and the role that we all play in this job of, like building information victory gardens, right? And amplifying stuff through our networks. It's the core reason we're here, right? I mean, all the stuff I'm giving you every day and sending to you is in order to make you a more effective information warrior through your communities and networks. And one of the big arguments that I made yesterday, and I continue to make to Ken and to everyone else, is that I still think that one of the most powerful ways that we're going to unlock greater loudness for us is by the National Democratic Party asking the 7 million donors to become partners in the fight and not donors to the cause, and become amplifiers and to engage in the information space. And it's what we've been doing here, right? One of the ways that we engaged in the information space this year is that we were the first organization to really push this idea of calling House and Senate offices. We've helped create this idea of these town hall meetings in red districts and in red parts of the country, right? This was a new tactic. A lot of the grassroots, right, has been doing traditional political work. We're inventing new things that are, phone calls, postcards and canvassing and all the more traditional campaign oriented stuff. We're now needing to build this new stuff. And yeah, Indivisible and the Tesla takedowns and the flag, the June 14th events, right? These are all new ways for us to get louder. And I do want to say that what's important is that I believe that by there not being a strong top down, like we have to do this, right? It's creating innovation. All these new things are being tested. What I love about the Hopium chat is that you see every day people coming in and talking about things that have worked in their community. And that's the way I think this is all that we build a more resilient and durable and stronger movement, is that it's from the bottom up and not the top down. And there's a lot of sense in the family of absence in Washington, that Washington isn't fighting hard enough. But Trump's numbers have come way down, and we just pushed Elon Musk out of town, and we're continuing to win in the courts all the time. The circle of defiance continues to grow. And the way you know that is they are escalating against that, right? They are feeling the pressure and they're escalating against that. They're getting more wild. And the idea that they're continuing to lose in court, as I shared this article this week, and this is what I'll close with, is that I just think that both the Democratic Party, the Democratic grassroots, our democracy itself, federalism, is proving to be more resilient than I think the Trump people thought we would all be. I don't think that they are happy with where he is. How do we know that? Because they've now started running ads to push him up. They wouldn't be doing that if they felt good about where he was. So we should come out of this period, I think, in this place that I often talk about, that we have to be, I think, satisfied, maybe not the right word. Um, we have to be, we have to acknowledge that we've had a lot of wins and that we've had victories, and the circle of defiance is growing. But we also recognize that it's insufficient, right? It's necessary, but insufficient. That we want our opposition to be stronger, but we can't allow that sense that we need to be doing more to drown out the significant progress that we've actually made and the resilience that our democracy is demonstrating. Having said that, the urgency that we have to continue to operate under is is under this because Trump is breaking things that are going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to repair. And both of these things are true, right? That we are making progress. We are getting wins. The tariff loss yesterday was devastating for Trump. It was devastating for him. It unraveled his entire domestic agenda. It made him look like a fucking buffoon to every government in the world. It gave, greater permission for other in all these other legal cases. By the way, that suit was brought by the Democratic attorney generals. That tariff suit was the Democratic attorney generals. You've heard here three attorney generals who were involved in that suit talking about it here, right? Chris Mays, Keith Ellison, and Raul Torres from New Mexico all came on and talked about this suit and the centrality of this tariff suit to their whole strategy to constrain Trump and to undermine him, right? And this was a huge victory for the Democratic attorneys general. I didn't really hit that hard enough today in the Post, and I will tomorrow. And so, where I think we are, everybody, is that I think a couple things is that I think we had made, we're showing resilience and strength and grit and every day, and you guys are doing it every day. The Hopium community, I think, is not just doing it. We're leaders in this effort in all of our communities. We've raised lots of money. We've had put real points on the board this year, in this election cycle. We funded the legal work for Allison Riggs, right? We gave Ken Martin $100,000 to get off the ground. We're one of Abby Spanberger's largest donors in the country, right? We're now starting to raise money slowly for the House races that we need to raise money for to give them the resources they have. I'm proud of all of that. But I also, at every moment, am aware, and we have to be aware, and we can't look away, that he is breaking things that will be very difficult, if not impossible, to repair. And that what he's doing ultimately, and this is how I ended my presentation yesterday, is that he is stealing the future of our kids and our grandkids. And that we have to come at this with the level of intensity the moment requires while exercising self care and having a summer, right? I think one of the biggest recommendations I've come about, and I realized for myself, I got tired in the last couple of weeks. I hit a wall a little bit just personally, and I've been working 7 days a week, and I haven't really taken a vacation in a while. And I need to have a summer. I'm tan in part because my wife and I gardened, and we went to two Nats games this weekend. And, I actually took off the weekend from writing Hopium for the first time. I think I didn't produce Hopium for 2 days in a row for the first time. I don't even know when, right? That there was 2 days went by without Hopium going out. And that was really good. I needed that, right? And we all have to have this urgency, have this sense of progress. The circle of defiance is growing. And we need to have a summer too, right? It's just critical that one of the ways we defy Trump is by having summer and by having joy. And my wife right now has a bunch of girlfriends over downstairs, and they're having out in the backyard. And, just it was nice, spontaneous event. She's like, it's going to be during your event. We won't make too much noise. I promise. I'm going to go out there and hang out and have some wine with them in a minute. But, we need to do all of that too, right? We can't become, because we have to lessen his hold over us. Part of this, our defiance is not letting him occupy our mind all day long, right? And so that's it. I mean, I come about, I had a great trip, and Hopium was really well received, and there's an awareness among people all across the country of the significance of this community that we built together. I'm really proud of all of you, proud of what we've done, and also just aware of how much work that's in front of us. But we're gritty, we're proud, plucky patriots here, ad hopium, and we're going to keep fighting really hard. Thanks, everybody.